If he comes tonight, we must not be unprepared.
How were weddings actually conducted in the time of Jesus, far from modern idealizations and ceremonies as we know them today? What did it mean for a young woman and for her family to wait for a groom without knowing the exact day when he would come to fetch her? For centuries, we have imagined unions driven mainly by individual feelings, personal choices, and romantic promises. But the Jewish world of the first century worked differently. Marriage was part of family survival, collective honor, and the continuity of life. A young woman remained in her parents' house, prepared in silence, while a groom worked, saved money, and waited for the right moment. No date was announced. No security was guaranteed until the last moment. Stay until the end, because understanding this context transforms the reading of the Gospels and can strengthen your faith. In the time of Jesus, marriage did not begin with feelings, but with family decisions. It was not born out of individual desire, but collective necessity. Parents met, talked, evaluated possibilities, and established agreements that would affect entire generations. The future of a young woman was not decided by her, but by the men responsible for her protection and survival. This arrangement was not seen as oppression, but as social order. In an unstable world where diseases, hunger, and violence were constant, marriage needed to offer security before any affection. The bride and groom, most of the time, barely knew each other. Some had seen each other a few times. Others had only heard of one another. There were no private dates, nor long romantic conversations. The bond began on paper, with the word given between families, and only later would it develop through coexistence. What we today call love was expected as a consequence, not as a starting point. Commitment came before feeling. The covenant preceded intimacy. The parents' authority was central in this process. They evaluated reputation, stability, capacity for work, and family honor. A poorly arranged marriage could ruin an entire family. The wrong choice meant misery, public shame, and permanent insecurity for the woman. For this reason, marriage was treated as a serious, almost solemn matter. There was no room for emotional improvisation. Survival spoke louder. This agreement turned marriage into a true social and economic alliance. It united not only two people, but two clans, two histories, two support networks. In times of crisis, this union could guarantee food, shelter, and protection. In times of stability, it strengthened bonds and expanded influence. Marriage was a life strategy, not a symbolic gesture. But before any celebration, there was a price to be paid. Before any celebration could even be imagined, there was a decisive and unavoidable stage, the payment of the dowry, known as the moar. This amount was neither symbolic nor optional. It represented a public demonstration of responsibility. The groom needed to prove, in concrete terms, that he had real conditions to support a family. Words were not enough. Intentions were insufficient. In a world marked by scarcity, commitment needed to be visible, measurable, and recognized by all. The moar was not given to the bride, but to her family. This detail reveals the logic of that time. The parents had invested years caring for, feeding, and protecting that daughter. The dowry acknowledged this responsibility and, at the same time, functioned as a mechanism of future protection. If the husband died or abandoned his wife, that amount returned to her as a minimum guarantee of survival. Marriage could not result in helplessness. It needed to create lasting security. This aspect reveals something fundamental about that world. Marriage needed to offer solid foundations before anything else. The dowry was not a measure of affection, but of publicly assumed commitment. It demonstrated the capacity to sustain, protect, and remain, even when circumstances became adverse. The payment of the dowry also carried social weight. From that moment on, the groom placed his honor at stake. A man who failed in this commitment stained not only his own reputation, but that of his entire family. The agreement was public, observed, remembered. There was no room for silent abandonment or forgotten promises. The community became a witness to that pact. This commitment was recorded in a document called the ketubah. More than a simple contract, it established clear duties and defined expectations: provision, dignity, care, and protection. The ketubah did not seek emotion, but stability, and it was precisely this structure that allowed life together to develop with trust over time. From that moment, the young woman was no longer considered available. Even while still living in her parents' house, she already belonged to a legal commitment. And it was in this delicate interval between the payment of the dowry and living under the same roof that the most tense phase of the whole process began. When the dowry was paid and the ketubah signed, the marriage already officially existed. Betrothal, in the time of Jesus, was not a future promise, but a legally recognized bond. In the eyes of the family and the community, that man and woman were already united. They did not live together, did not share the same domestic space, but the commitment had already been made. The only thing that did not yet exist was the common house. Everything else was already established. This detail profoundly alters the way we understand this phase. Breaking a betrothal did not mean changing one's mind. It meant undoing a marriage. Separation required a formal divorce, with all the legal and social implications involved. There was no room for simple or silent withdrawal. The assumed commitment carried real legal weight and clear public consequences. Betrothal was a definitive state, not a provisional one. Within this bond, fidelity was already required. Even before living together, even before the celebration, the couple was exclusively committed. The covenant preceded life in common. Marriage began with commitment, not with a house. This logic, so distant from the modern view, explains why this stage carried such seriousness. It was not about emotional expectation, but about assumed responsibility. It is in this context that the account of Mary and Joseph gains historical depth. Upon perceiving Mary's pregnancy during the betrothal, Joseph naturally concluded that he had been betrayed. This was the only plausible explanation within the social and legal order of that time. His pain was not only emotional, it was the pain of a man who believed his honor had been violated and his commitment broken before God and the community. Betrothal, therefore, was a marriage without a house, a complete, recognized, and irreversible bond that existed before daily life in common. The covenant was established, but there was still an interval to cross before everything became visible and celebrated. During betrothal, the bride remained in her parents' house. She was generally between 12 and 14 years old, still very young by modern standards, but already inserted into a world of clear responsibilities. Childhood ended early. From the moment the agreement was made, every gesture, every word, and every movement began to be observed closely. Her life entered a disciplined period of waiting, marked by preparation and constant vigilance. This preparation was not merely symbolic. It involved the body, behavior, and social identity. The young woman was instructed by older women of the family. Frequent baths, perfumed oils, hair care, and simple adornments were part of this process. It was not about vanity, but readiness. She needed to be prepared for the moment when the groom came to fetch her. Nothing could be improvised. Everything had to reflect honor, purity, and dignity. The most striking element of this phase was the wait without a defined date. Unlike modern weddings, there was no scheduled day. The groom would only return when the house was ready and all conditions fulfilled. The bride knew he would come, but not when. This uncertainty shaped daily behavior. Sleeping, working, talking, and even resting happened under the awareness that that night could be decisive. The lamp needed to be full, the garments ready, the attention constant. Vigilance did not come only from family, but from the entire community. Neighbors watched, rumors circulated, everyone's honor was at stake. Any carelessness could generate suspicions difficult to erase. Fidelity needed to be demonstrated in absence, not in cohabitation. It was a silent wait, full of tension and expectation. It is impossible to ignore how Jesus used exactly this setting in his parables. When he spoke of bridesmaids, lit lamps, and constant vigilance, he was not creating poetic images. He was describing a known reality, lived in the body and routine. The waiting taught readiness, responsibility, and perseverance. And then, when least expected, the silence of the night could be interrupted. When the time of waiting finally came to an end, nothing was announced in advance. The groom did not warn, did not set an hour, did not send messengers. He simply departed. He gathered his closest friends and, when the night had already overtaken the village, began the path toward the bride's house. This moment marked the definitive rupture between promise and consummation. What came before could no longer be resumed. The procession advanced through the narrow streets with lit torches. The flickering light drew unstable shadows on the stone walls, while the sound of footsteps echoed on the uneven ground. Voices rose in simple, repetitive songs, accompanied by clapping and rudimentary instruments. The silence of the night was gradually broken, as if the village itself were awakening. Doors opened. People appeared in the distance. Everyone knew what that sound meant. The air was filled with the smell of burning oil. The heat of the flames contrasted with the cold of the night. The music had no hurry, but it did not stop. The procession was neither rushed nor restrained. It advanced firmly, aware of its destination. Each step brought the groom closer to the moment that would end the period of waiting and initiate a new life. In the bride's house, the environment transformed. The tension did not come from fear, but from expectation. Time seemed to compress. The distant sound of voices became increasingly close. There was no room for last-minute adjustments. Everything that needed to be ready had to already be ready. The night did not allow corrections. When the procession finally arrived, what one saw was not merely a door opening, but a passage being crossed before everyone's eyes. The bride was called, lifted, led outside, and in that instant the entire village understood that the promise would cease to be promise. The path now continued to the place where the new house would be symbolically built, even if for a few minutes, under a simple covering. And it was there, under that canopy, that ancient words would be spoken, and the commitment would be sealed definitively. The procession did not end upon arriving at the house. It led the bride to a simple space, but one filled with meaning, the chuppah. It was not a temple, nor an altar. It was a canopy, sustained by pillars or stretched fabrics, open on the sides, visible to all. The chuppah symbolized the new home that was being formed. Even though temporary, it represented the official beginning of life in common. There, before the family and the community, the union became public. There was no formal religious ceremony as we imagine today. There was no priest conducting a long or standardized ritual. The center of the moment was the blessings. Parents, older relatives, and family leaders pronounced ancient words, filled with desires for fertility, prosperity, fidelity, and continuity. The blessing was not a performance. It was a serious invocation over the future of that couple. Everyone listened. Everyone would remember those words. After the blessings, the union was consummated. This was not a hidden or irrelevant detail. The consummation confirmed that the marriage was complete. From that moment on, there was no more promise, nor interval. There was reality. Marriage ceased to be a contract and became shared life. What had been agreed upon, paid for, and promised was now fulfilled. This moment definitively sealed the union. The community recognized it. The families rejoiced. The bond was complete, protected, and honored. But the marriage did not end there. On the contrary, that night was only the beginning of something greater, more visible, and more prolonged. With the union sealed under the chuppah, the marriage entered its most visible and prolonged phase, the feast. Unlike the brief celebrations of the modern world, wedding feasts in the time of Jesus lasted 7 days and could extend even further, depending on the family's conditions. It was not a private event, but a community one. The entire village participated. Eating, drinking, singing, and dancing were part of a collective commitment of public joy. The responsibility for this celebration fell mainly upon the groom. He was the one who needed to ensure enough food, wine, and hospitality for all the days of the feast. Failing in this was not a minor detail. It represented deep social shame. A feast interrupted or diminished marked the beginning of the marriage with public humiliation, placing the groom's ability to sustain his household in doubt. Honor, so carefully protected until that moment, could be lost in a matter of minutes. It is in this context that the episode of Cana in Galilee becomes decisive. When the wine runs out, we are not facing a simple domestic mishap. It is a serious social crisis. The lack of wine threatens to expose the groom to ridicule before the entire community. What is at stake is not merely the continuation of the feast, but the reputation of a newly formed family. By performing his first public miracle there, Jesus does not choose a temple, a synagogue, or a palace. He chooses a wedding. He chooses a domestic feast. He chooses the moment when human honor is about to break. The transformation of water into wine not only saves the celebration, but restores dignity, abundance, and joy. The best wine appears when everything seemed about to end. And so, among wine, celebration, and restored honor, marriage ceases to be just an ancient custom and begins to reveal eternal truths that echo far beyond that village. To conclude, reflect. When observing weddings in the time of Jesus, we realize that they were not merely ancient customs, but structures that sustained lives, families, and hope. Contracts, dowries, waiting, feast, and honor formed a language that God used to reveal eternal truths. Christ presented himself as the bridegroom because everyone understood the weight of that promise. Real commitment, certain return, and future joy. Christian faith is born within this logic of fulfilled covenant, not of fleeting emotion. The Church waits, trusts, and prepares, knowing that history moves toward final consummation. Understanding these customs not only illuminates the Gospels, but strengthens our conviction today. And if this documentary edified your faith and expanded your biblical understanding, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Write in the comments what caught your attention the most, and help this message reach more people and strengthen our community of faith together. Until the next video, and may God bless you.